All right, folks, we're going to get underway. Let's see, a few more people have signed on. We anticipate some more to join us throughout the hour. Want to again welcome all of you to today's webinar. Again, I'm Jay Nichols. I head up our Government Relations Department, and joining me also here in Washington D.C. area is John Monsef, who runs the Government Relations over at First Focus. And another organization dedicated to advancing the needs of children. Today we would like to use this opportunity to not only just give you a brief update as what's happening budget-wise here with regards to Congress, now that Congress is out on recess until after Labor Day, but an opportunity for John to present on First Focus's annual children's budget. It was just published in June. They've been doing this for quite some time. It's a pretty comprehensive breakdown of funding for children's programs and how where needs tend to be met and where needs are falling short. It's should be a great presentation, and you'll be hearing from John in a short while. Just want to again welcome all of you here today. Hope your summer's going great, and hopefully you have some time off before the kids go back to school. Again, here at Child Care Aware of America, I think most of you are familiar with it. Our mission is pretty straightforward. It's advancing, quality care for all children and families. We really do target underserved. Not only do we want quality care, we want healthy care, and we want accessible care for all families. And what we're really involved with, as many of you can imagine, is with the reauthorization of CCDBG in November of 2014. We have really been working very closely with states on CCDBG implementation. The Administration for Children and Families just recently published all the state and 7 territory plans, as well as District of Columbia, the fiscal year 2016 through 2018 plans on their website. And just to give everyone here to give you a heads up, Child Care Aware of America, we are currently working on providing a comprehensive review of all the state plans, and you could probably expect to see that towards the end of this month. And so we will be sure to keep all of you in the loop on that and our progress. Want to just very briefly, before I hand things over to John, want to just just give you a quick update on what's going on with appropriations. I know many of you do subscribe to our news feed, and we routinely provide updates for you. But as you'll see on the screen, the Senate Committee approved its bill in June, and the House followed suit just a short while ago. And as you can see, these are the proposed funding levels for key programs of interest to everyone on this call. In addition, for the Head Start proposals, there's about $600 million set aside for early Head Start child care partnerships in both bills. While it's encouraging, they propose no cuts for these programs, they are very, very minimal increases and far below what the administration requested. And to be honest with you, it will certainly, these funding levels really are extremely inadequate for next year. So we are maintaining our commitment to representing all of you and to work with Congress and both the Republican and Democratic staff on the hopes that, as we head towards the end of the year, we could get better numbers. Where we go from here, like I said, Congress is on recess, and they won't return until after Labor Day. But when they do return, they don't have many days to complete a budget, and we anticipate that it won't happen. So when we push late next month, Congress will enact what's called a continuing resolution or a CR. That'll probably keep the government open and funded until sometime after the election. Depending on how the outcome of the election will likely determine what a final budget could look like. It is also possible that Congress might enact another continuing resolution into next spring, and then just have a new administration and a new Congress in early 2017 try to finalize the budget. So please, we will keep in touch. We will routinely provide you with updates as we learn of them, but I have a feeling we probably won't hear much for the remainder of August, as many staff well, obviously members, but many staff really probably won't begin any negotiations until they return, which will likely just be a short-term continuing resolution. And lastly, just wanted to, as of yesterday, Child Care of America's August Recess Toolkit is now live on our website, and it has a number of items on there, including draft letters to the editor, draft letters to your member of Congress, advocating for full funding for programs like CCDBG and Head Start. This is a great opportunity for your delegation to hear from you. In addition to bringing these programs, funding for these programs to their attention, we would also encourage you to offer them an invitation to visit the site, whether it be to visit a child care and/or Head Start program. So, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Either through email or through via phone, and I'm always happy to help. And with that, John, I'm going to hand it over to you, where you can discuss what it is you do at First Focus, including a rundown of how the budget process works, and really look forward to hearing about the 2016 budget report.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. I certainly appreciate the introduction as well as the opportunity to speak today. The work that you all do on a grassroots level is just so critical, and so we certainly appreciate all those efforts to help influence the work we do here in D.C., especially on such critical programs as Head Start and CCDBG and the preschool development grants. So just very briefly, just a little bit about me. I came to D.C. about 9 years ago. I worked on the Hill for 7 years with 3 different members of Congress. I served as a chief of staff to 2 and an LD to another. Really enjoyed my experience on the Hill, but ultimately wanted to come off and lobby and wanted to advocate for something that was important to me. And so I had the opportunity to join Save the Children Action Network and lobby on behalf of children. And that's actually where I had the privilege and opportunity to meet Jay. We were colleagues there for a time. We both have since left, which is clear from this conversation today, and I joined First Focus 4 months ago, and I work specifically on budget, appropriations, and tax policy for children. So that's just a little bit background on myself. If we can go to the next slide. What I'd like to talk today to you all about is 3 things. Tell you a little bit about First Focus, talk about the appropriations process. It's a complex process, and so I thought it might be helpful to speak to it at a 10,000-foot level, as well as discuss, as Jay mentioned, our children's budget that we just released in last month. So those would be the 3 areas that I'd love for us to cover. If we can go to the next slide, Jay. So just briefly, First Focus, we're a bipartisan children's advocacy organization that focuses on children and families. And we work on a number of different issues in addition to budget and tax. We work on education, nutrition, health, early childhood education, and child welfare, to name a few. And so by collectively working on all of these issues, we feel that we're true children's advocates. We want to be a one-stop shop for folks on the Hill in the administration, as well as our counterparts in the advocacy field. And so we really work hard to provide as much input and thought on issues that impact children. Next slide. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about the Congressional Appropriations process. As I mentioned, the process is somewhat complex. And just to step back, Congress is made up of a number of different committees. You have Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations, Ways and Means, and Finance. And they all have jurisdiction over certain areas. One of the key committees, obviously, for us is Appropriations. Appropriations is a committee that is the same in both the House and Senate. So they have the same exact subcommittees, and they work alongside each other. Within the Appropriations Committee, there's actually 12 different subcommittees. For instance, there's Agriculture, there's Commerce, there's Justice and Science, and there's financial services. And these 12 different subcommittees are responsible for introducing appropriations or spending bills, which provides funding for a number of different programs. And the length of these funding or these spending bills, they begin on October 1st of a year and end on September 30th. So you take a look at all these different 12 subcommittees, and the one that really has the most impact on children is the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education subcommittee. That's called Labor H. And so the different programs that you'll be advocating for fall under the Labor H bill. And just to note, the Appropriations Committee was at one time a very coveted committee on the Hill. And what we've seen over recent years is, unfortunately, that's changed. And it's changed because there's been a big push to cut funding beginning in 2010. And so as a result, at one point when you were on the committee and you were able to dole out money, that was considered a good thing. Now they're forced to make some really difficult decisions and having to cut programs that, quite frankly, they probably find very important too, but have just limited resources to fund. And so that's why it's so important as advocates for us to be on the Hill and for you as grassroots to be communicating with your members, because they do have to make tough decisions because there's so many limited resources. So if we can go on to the next slide. So every year there's an appropriation cycle that funds discretionary programs, and these are the programs where funding is optional. So the discretionary programs are critical to a lot of the programs that are important to children. In addition to discretionary programs, there are mandatory programs, and those are programs like Medicare and Social Security. But those are actually not funded through the appropriations process. So we really focus on the discretionary accounts. Now, in terms of when the process starts, it really does change every year just based on the level of flexibility that Congress can give itself. And so that's something interesting to follow, especially as advocates, because we need to time our outreach at the appropriate time. So that all being said, how does it begin? It begins with the President releasing his budget on the first Monday in February. So once he does that, he provides Congress with kind of a roadmap of the different programs and agencies, the funding levels he thinks are appropriate for those programs and agencies. And so Congress could use that as a benchmark. They can accept it, they can reject it. It really depends on the priorities of Congress. But the President does start off the appropriations cycle in February. If you want to go to the next slide. Once the President submits his budget to Congress, Congress begins work on their budget. And they're supposed to get a budget done by April 15th. Now they create two different budgets. The Senate has their own and the House has their own. And the budget, what they do is really they set the top line number as to how much can be spent in that given year. And so if they say, okay, in fiscal year 17, they say that they have $1 trillion, then that $1 trillion needs to be divided between the 12 subcommittees. And that's actually a really important part of advocacy, because when they break out the funding to the different subcommittees, we want to be sure as advocates that Labor H gets the most funding as possible. So it becomes a very competitive process. So not only do you want to advocate for your programs, but you also want to advocate for the biggest pie, part of the biggest share of the pie. Now, just keep in mind that the budget resolution that the House and Senate does is not law and it is not sent to the President, but it is, again, a guideline for them by which to determine how much they can spend on annual cycle. So if we can go to the next slide. Once the ceiling is committed and then they allocate the different funding to the different subcommittees, then the subcommittees begin working on their spending bills. And the subcommittees have a handful of members. They craft it. And a lot of the process is really done at that moment. What you'll find is that the subcommittee will submit then a bill to the full committee, and the full committee tends to approve it with very minor changes. And so it's important for us, again, as advocates, to be aware of the timing of that and to advocate at that point as well. Once it passes the subcommittees and the full committees, it goes to the House floor and Senate floor for a vote, and the timing of that varies from year to year. This year, committees began working very early, and they began in April and worked all the way through the first and second week of July. So they work in August. They work through the recess, till the recess, really with a goal of getting all 12 spending bills done, and we have not seen that happen in years. And so as Jay alluded to earlier, what happens now is probably that we'll see a continuing resolution because they're not able to get to those 12 spending bills. You can go to the next slide. But let's assume that they are able to do that. If the House passes their bill, the Senate passes their bill, then they come together and they pull together a compromise bill and negotiate the differences between the two bills. And again, we've seen that so rarely these days, but that is how it's supposed to work. Presumably, once you agree on numbers, it goes to the President for his or her signature. So like I said, that hasn't happened, and so we're really faced with the continuing resolution option, which just extends the time frame that the government operates, or and then ultimately an omnibus, where once that resolution's up, you have to have one big spending bill to pay for all the different programs that the government funds. And quite frankly, if that doesn't happen, and we've seen this a handful of times, most recently in 2013, then you'll see the government shut down. And so when you hear about the government shutdown, it really revolves around the time frame by which they have to get all their work done. So that's a quick overview. Again, it's somewhat complex. I hope that was helpful. I know it's a lot of information, but it hopefully gives some color and some background as to kind of how the process works and, quite frankly, why you're all so important. I mentioned through that process that there's different times for us to advocate. The work that you'll be doing in August is critical because that'll help influence the omnibus and the ultimate numbers that we may see in December or March of next year. So your voice is so critical to this process and is greatly appreciated. So if we go on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit now about the Children's Budget 2016. So this book is, as Jay mentioned, we've been doing for about 10 years now. And the impetus behind the book was, quite frankly, when you ask about how much we invest in children, there wasn't one place where you can collect all that information. And so as an organization, we decided to pull together this book where we break it out in a lot of different categories. So we have an early childhood education section, we have an education section, a health section, a child welfare. And the idea there is for each of these different areas to really show what the spending levels are for those programs. What's great about it is it gives historical data going back 5 years, but it also, more importantly, shows kind of the trend. And so we're able to monitor how we're doing as it pertains to funding children's programs. The book has over 200 different accounts, and so if you were to go through the book, you would see, what accounts are important to you. You could see, what the funding was for the last 5 years, and ultimately kind of give you background on each of those programs. So we hope it's helpful to folks both in the field and to people in the on the Hill and in the administration. So if we go on to the next slide. What I want to talk about now is just a little bit about what we found in the 2016 children's budget. And unfortunately, we found that the trends continue to go downward. So we found that discretionary spending as a share of the overall spending for children fell in 2016 from to 7.83%. And so what I'm saying there is that, of all the spending that we have, discretionary spending, the share for children is continuing to drop. And in fact, over the last 6 years, it's dropped 7.3%. So our share of the pie is getting smaller as it pertains to critical children's programs. Another concerning trend is that there certainly is new federal spending, and what we're finding, unfortunately, is that just 2.1% of that new federal spending goes to children. So again, not only is our share shrinking, but any new funding that comes out is not really committed, dedicated to children. So, what does the future look like? And, one of the things that our partner, the Urban Institutes, in their KidShare book found was that that children are projected to continue to just receive 2% of all new federal spending over the next 10 years. And so this trend, unfortunately, will continue. And in 3 years also what they found, and this was alarming to me, is that the amount of money we spend on interest on the federal debt will be more than we spend on children. So, I think we have to take a look at these priorities, and again, this is where it's so important for you all to support the work we're doing by advocating for these important programs, and we certainly appreciate that. So these are definitely concerning downward trends, and it's something that we need to monitor and follow closely. Go on to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about education, because this is a particular area that really has been impacted negatively by sequestration. Sequestration occurred about 3 years ago, and that's unfortunately when the Congress put together what they called a super committee that had to come up with a way to really cut spending. And the consequence of them not coming up with a solution to cutting spending was that a sequestration would take place. And so what that means is that funding for across every single account was going to be cut uniformly at a certain percentage. And folks thought that the threat of cutting funding just unilaterally like that would actually force them to do their job, and unfortunately it didn't. So what happened was programs were deeply impacted by these cuts. And education is an example that it was really hit hard. And what we see for education is that the share dropped to just 7.78% in 2012, and so that's a serious concern. And in education, in 2012 to 2016, the spending on education dropped by 12.6%. So, and in just 1 year alone, education declined by 15% from FY12 to FY13. So you can see again that education was deeply impacted by the sequestration, and something that hopefully in the next Congress we'll be able to avert in the same way we did last fall. So if we can go on to the next slide. So what's the solution? There's a lot of different things that can be done out there. And one of the things that First Focus did in partnership with about 25 other organizations is put together a coalition around advocating for increasing funding for children's programs. And really it was put together to hold members of Congress accountable, and so to funding children's programs. And what we do is we work collectively to advocate for, as I said, the biggest share to go to the Labor H bill, as well as advocate for programs that are important to each of the different members of the organizations. And so we do have a number of organizations who advocate for early childhood education programs, Head Start, CCDBG, and the preschool development grants. And so, the work we do here is good, but the work that you all do out in the field is, I would say, even more important. It's so critical for members of Congress to hear your voice, whether it be through phone calls, whether it be through actually sitting down and meeting with in-district folks, letters to the editor, op-eds. It's really important for your members to hear from you about how critical those programs are to you and how they impact you. Having been on the Hill, I saw firsthand how important that is. Within our offices, we actually set up rules where we said if we received 20 letters about a certain bill or issue, we would have to respond and take a look at that bill very closely and that issue very closely. And that seems bizarre, but if you can imagine, there's thousands and thousands of bills and people have hundreds and hundreds of different priorities. And so how do you kind of narrow that down? You listen to your constituents and to what they really want. And so to hear from you through a letter or a phone call or to read a letter to the editor or op-ed really does influence a member's position on a particular issue. So that's that again is so critically important, and we so greatly appreciate the work you do out in the field. And Jay did a great job earlier about describing where we are in the appropriations process now, and that we most likely have a CR. Just to go, if we go on the last slide here, just to step back from that, the President released his budget in February of this year, and just wanted to share that Congress, both the House and Senate, actually never did have a budget. They never actually arrived at one. And the reason for that is they couldn't agree on what their priorities were. And so it's unfortunate, but that's kind of where the process is. But all that being said, while I've focused a lot on process here, what's important to recognize is that the different bills that come out of the subcommittee and ultimately pass out of subcommittee and full committee, which they've done all 12 bills this year, they just have not brought them to a majority of them to the floor. Those numbers will be what they use to put together an omnibus and our final numbers for the year. And so again, going back to your role, this is a very important time for you to reach out to your members and say, as you look at this next step in the process, it's important to prioritize children's funding, and in particular CCDBG, Head Start, and the preschool development grant. So we certainly, again, appreciate your support on that. And if you have any questions, like Jay said, please feel free to either email or call me, and I'd be happy to walk through some of this with you.
John, thank you. Thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. And again, we're leaving our contact information up for you, for both myself and for John. And just wanted to, you'll see 2 extra links. Just once again, our August recess toolkit is now live and will remain so until next month when Congress returns from from the recess. In addition to that, wanted to give all of you a heads up. The last link you see at the bottom is our Child Care Works initiative, which is going to, which we are going to officially launch next month. And just want to give you access to the link, and it's going to contain a lot of information, not only with our child care work, but how it ties into both national and state and local initiatives. And it's going to be a multi-year effort, and we're really looking forward to it. I've been encouraging folks who are listening in to ask questions via our chat box. So far, I haven't seen any come across, but I could actually, John, I think I'll pose a question here, and it is tied to the election, actually. I remember when I was at Save the Children back in 2012, we worked on an effort to get both the Romney and Obama campaigns to respond to early child development and child care issues, and both of them responded in different ways. But do you have any advice in particular for those on the phone if they were to reach out to either campaign, either the Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump campaigns, and pose questions to them about their stances on child care, or even possibly attend a public event where you might get the opportunity to ask either Secretary Clinton or Mr. Trump questions on these issues? Do you have any particular advice of how they could possibly get engaged, or even it could even be something to where they could also do what they would similarly do to an August recess effort with members of Congress?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point, Jay, and to be part of the process, not only in Congress but the presidential election is absolutely critical. And what we're finding now is that there's been so many other issues that have come up And what we haven't seen, unfortunately, is a real focus on children's issues. And so if there is ever an opportunity to attend an event, a town hall, I think it's critically important for folks to ask the two presidential candidates what their positions are on funding for children and children programs. And with all that noise out there, the only way this is raised is by folks like yourselves out in the field who do push this type of question and those types of questions on to the campaigns. And I would also recommend even writing the campaigns so that they hear that these are important issues to you in the same way you could do a member of Congress, or also a letter to the editor, and really target the campaigns depending on where you are in the country. There are certain states that that will be very competitive, and if you're in one of those states, then your voice at that time, I think, is critically important.
I agree completely with that, John, and I would even go as far as to say it's important to remind folks that there are vice presidential candidates too, and there might be opportunities with either Mr. Kaine or Mr. Pence if they were to come to your area for a public event, or even approach a surrogate of theirs. Both candidates have a lot of folks, both elected and non-elected folks, out there stumping for their candidate, and if they're representing their candidate, they should be in there speaking on their behalf when people approach. There may not be an opportunity for the presidential candidates for you to attend one of those events, but you might have either a vice presidential candidate or just a town hall or public event organized by the campaigns themselves with the surrogate there speaking on their behalf. So any opportunity to get involved and ask these very important questions, please take full advantage of.
Yeah, and I would also suggest as another tool or tactic or method would be social media. Whether it be through Twitter or Facebook on the presidential campaigns social media sites.
Yep, exactly. Yep, that's an excellent point. Many of these folks tend to do chat through Twitter and through Facebook. So, all right, thanks, John, for that. Really appreciate your feedback. And since we haven't any questions asked from our audience today, I think we're going to go ahead and close this session. As always, I know many of you have asked. Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be on our YouTube page later today. And if you would like to have a copy of the slide deck, it will be posted on our website under Advocacy and Public Policy section shortly. And I want to extend my deepest thanks to John Monsif from First Focus for joining us today to discuss the children's budget, the budget process in general, as well, and offer some insight on 2016 election. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the summer, and stay tuned. We're going to start planning this coming fall a series of weekly webinars that is going to be coinciding with our new Child Care Works campaign. So be on the lookout for that. We should be announcing these webinars very soon. So with that, wish you all of you well, and John, again, thanks, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks so much.
All right, have a good one.
Take care.